She stood frozen. Behind the glass, Marlo watched her quiet little girl slowly cross the yard toward a man she didn't even know. In the soft morning light, the carpenter worked. His hands moved with a quiet, genuine patience that money simply cannot buy. Callum Reeves never once looked up. He just kept working, slow, steady. The gentle scrape of wood felt as natural and calm as quiet breathing. Norah stopped just 3 steps away, a little girl who hadn't spoken a single word in 3 years. She never approached strangers on her own, yet here she was, standing completely still, just watching him. Then her lips parted. No sound came out, but she was trying to speak. From behind the glass, Marlo clutched her chest. In that silent moment, the powerful executive forgot to breathe. Let's step back for a moment. 2 days earlier, Marlo never planned on bringing Norah to this town. This business trip was supposed to be simple. Just 3 days in a quiet Vermont town she'd never heard of, before her team found an old, abandoned community center. It had plenty of empty space, perfect for a cheap research annex, tucked away far enough from the big city. Out in Boston, nobody would question why Voss Therapeutics was rushing to set up this new satellite branch. She came to personally oversee the start of renovations. Just sign the papers and head home by Thursday. Norah was supposed to stay back in Boston with Gail, her steady, longtime nanny. Gail knew the quiet girl's exact routines, and she knew how to respect her silence. But Tuesday morning, Norah woke up in such a panic that Gail was screaming for Marlo at 6 in the morning. A fear so deep and sudden that the poor girl hid under her bed, trapped there for 2 long hours. Shaking, completely unreachable. Later, her high-priced specialist offered the same clinical advice he always did. Limit changes, avoid new places, keep things predictable. But then he stopped, offering a rare piece of advice he'd never shared before. Unless she actually chooses to walk into that new space herself. Marlo didn't quite grasp his meaning, but she brought Norah along anyway. Ashford welcomed them with no fanfare. A quiet river town, just 2 churches, an old grain silo, and autumn trees that turned the golden afternoon light into stained glass. The grand brick building her money purchased sat quietly at the very end of a side street. 2 floors of old classic brick. Thousands of square feet of silent space, smelling of old dust and warm radiators. The agent had already hired a humble local contractor to manage the renovations. A local man named Bert Hadley. We both know how these pitches go. Bert promised that this quiet carpenter, Callum Reeves, was a rare find her money was lucky to secure. Callum Reeves arrived precisely at 8 o'clock the next morning. He drove an old rusted pickup truck that had clearly seen better years. He calmly carried in a worn canvas tool bag, never rushing his pace. For 20 minutes he walked the empty rooms in absolute silence, with Marlo following at a distance. Standing in the center hall, he quietly said, "The northwest corner is your acoustic problem. Whatever you place over there will sound off. You have to fix that before doing anything else." It was a simple observation, not a debate. Marlo quickly noted it down. He simply nodded and started. Marlo was only used to wealthy men who loved to show off their knowledge. Men who always made absolutely sure you noticed exactly how clever they were. But Callum just shared what he saw, completely unconcerned with trying to impress some wealthy executive. His quiet nature puzzled her. That evening his son Eli joined him. "Let's look at this together." A 10-year-old boy, thin and quiet, carrying a heavy seriousness no child should have. He quietly settled down on the back steps. Just a book and a simple snack, asking absolutely nothing from the world around him. Little Norah had been wandering through the quiet, empty halls of that massive renovation project. Moving carefully, as she always did in new places, she froze by the window overlooking those back steps. The boy looked up. He raised his hand in a soft, welcoming wave. Like greeting an old friend you quietly pass by every single week. Norah didn't wave back, but her eyes stayed firmly glued to that window. She just watched him read. Observing silently from across the vast room, Marlo felt 2 conflicting emotions strike. Her urge to control everything, fighting against a quiet, profound weight, telling her to just step back and watch. She stood perfectly still. Then, just before the boy headed home, Callum paused by the table where Marlo had scattered her expansive architectural floor plans. He picked up a sheet, studied it closely, and asked, "What is the ceiling height in the northeast room?" "The blueprints say 11 feet, but these proportions read closer to 9. Marlo promised she would check. He gently set the expensive paper back down. That simple question required deep expertise to even ask, but she decided to stay silent for now. She figured she would ask the carpenter later. Still, she spent the night tossing and turning. He arrived before 7 the next morning, carrying a completely different set of tools. Marlo noticed immediately, mostly because she had already been wide awake for hours. Standing in the kitchen of her luxury rental, just 2 blocks away from the site. Sipping dark coffee in the early light, lost in quiet thought, she heard his truck arrive. She watched closely from her kitchen window. He hauled flat wooden panels inside, tied with cord, materials totally unrelated to basic renovation work. She patiently bided her time. Walking across the yard to the main house, she found him fully set up inside. Running a hand plane slowly across a wooden board, listening to the soft, rhythmic scrape it made. He adjusted the sharp blade, smoothed the wood again, and paused. He was shaping the raw wood into a complex curved form that she could not recognize. Then it clicked, custom sound diffusion panels. The kind used in soothing therapeutic spaces designed for children with special needs. Children who absorb the noisy world through fragile senses long before they ever speak. You and I know this was far beyond carpentry. This was master-level acoustic art. Understanding the deep relationship between the curved wood and how sound traveled, creating a quiet haven for a little child who couldn't even say the word safe. Little Norah suddenly appeared in the doorway while Marlo watched from the shadows. Callum ignored them. His calloused hands just kept moving, turning the raw wood into a gentle, steady, comforting rhythm. Repeating that same soothing sound as steady and quiet as breathing. Creating a quiet miracle when nobody was watching. Working quietly, treating her presence like a gentle breeze, naturally accepted and completely accounted for. Norah crept inside. She sat on the floor behind him, completely mesmerized by his working hands. Marlo retreated to her laptop and quietly searched his name online. Callum Reeves, carpenter, Ashford, Vermont. She found a basic local business listing from 3 years ago. No website, no publicity. She dug deeper. Callum Reeves, architect. She refined her search. Callum Reeves, therapeutic design. That last search result stopped her cold. Reeves Therapeutic Spaces, Boston, Massachusetts. He was the principal architect. Look closely at Callum. He quietly pioneered sensory designs for nonverbal trauma. For 12 long years, she sat completely still. She discovered his firm's old pediatric design work. 12 projects in 6 states, hospitals, child centers, and quiet treatment homes. Every room proved his belief. A nonverbal child could still feel the quiet comfort whispered by the walls. Soft lights, soothing textures, and how sound moved gently between the walls. 3 brilliant papers and a keynote address at her past medical conference. Yet she had completely overlooked the gentle man. Even though she stood 30 feet from where his name sat quietly on her program. Suddenly, she understood. This was why Norah never feared his quiet presence. He spent 12 silent years learning to comfort vulnerable kids. Marlo looked up. Across the room, his son Eli slipped in quietly with 2 cups of water. He placed a cup softly beside Norah on the floor, saying absolutely nothing. No grand gestures, no forced talk. He simply walked away. Norah stared down at the cup, watching him quietly walk away. Slowly she reached out, lightly touching the rim, testing this gentle, quiet gift to see if it was real. A quiet miracle. For the first time in 3 years, she accepted a stranger's offering. Deeply moved, Marlo quickly turned her face away. She hid her tears from them, pressing a hand to her trembling mouth. We must wonder, why walk away? Did he know his quiet grace was seen? She chose complete silence, defying the loud, public way she usually operated. She usually weaponized secrets, turning private details into corporate power. Wealth and leverage taught her to use private truths to control people before they ever had a chance. Not out of cruelty, but pure corporate efficiency. That precise calculation built her drug firm from a tiny licensing business into a massive $2.4 billion giant without losing a single vote. But watching Callum work quietly all morning, she found no angle to play. What good would showing off her immense wealth actually do right now? He would simply confirm it, awkwardly shifting this beautiful unspoken bond. Or he would deny it, trapping them in a needless lie she demanded. Either way, she would ruin a sacred moment for reasons she could not grasp. Ever sensitive, Callum slowly realized that this wealthy mother was watching him differently. He grew even quieter, the way humble souls do when their secret goodness is finally discovered. It was not a retreat, just a quiet guarding of his heart. He kept focusing on his woodwork. He worked with the same humble, quiet devotion he gave to everything. But a deep, unspoken respect now filled the room between them. By noon, the children formed a quiet bond, not a loud friendship, but something deeply beautiful. Eli spoke very little, inheriting his father's quiet, gentle way of caring. Yet he spoke steadily like a person who understood that a child's silence never meant they were empty. He softly described a great blue heron standing quietly in a field as if it owned the land. He explained that those birds can wait perfectly still for 45 minutes just for a fish. An incredible patience, he admitted, that he didn't quite have himself. We see the truth: genuine love never needs an audience. Norah pulled a small notepad from her pocket, scribbled a quick question, and held it up. It said, "Do they catch the fish?" Eli read the page, looked up, and said, "Sometimes." That quiet answer was plenty for him. He went straight back to his reading. Watching from 3 rooms away, Marlo felt something completely new. It was a deep relief tangled with a sharp, quiet ache. A feeling she would rather keep completely unnamed. Derek Holt arrived at exactly 2 in the afternoon. He was 52 years old, broad-shouldered, with a very specific kind of tan. A golf course tan and a practiced smile that only looked warm if you stood far enough away. He claimed he heard that Marlo was back in town and simply had to welcome her in person. He sat on the planning board and had held that seat for 9 long years. He wanted every new investor in town to know they had an influential friend in local government. His eyes constantly scanned the building, which told her everything she needed to know. Marlo poured his coffee and just let him finish his little speech. Pacing the floor, he casually mentioned that his firm wanted this exact property 2 years ago. It had great bones, he said, admitting she paid a very fair price. But if the remodeling costs got too high, his group could easily take it off her hands. She thanked him coldly, stating the renovations were going perfectly fine without any help. She kept her eyes locked on his with a cool, steady politeness. A silent boundary she spent decades perfecting, one that absolutely no one could argue with. He finally left. That evening, as Callum packed his tools, Marlo watched from the window. Warm, amber light stretched across the dusty floorboards, filling the quiet space between them. She did not mean to break the silence, but the question slipped out anyway. "Your boy, how did you teach him not to pry into other people's lives?" Callum paused. He set his hammer down with quiet care before looking up to meet her steady gaze. "I taught him that silence isn't always an answer," the carpenter replied softly. "Sometimes it's a question." He took his tool bag and slipped out into the evening. Marlo stood in that quiet stillness for a long time. Think about that. 3 days passed in that beautiful, silent rhythm of people working with shared purpose. The dedicated father arrived early and worked until 5. Every morning, little Norah quietly appeared right at the edge of his workspace. Each morning, she drifted just a few inches closer than the day before. Never rushing, it was like watching the tide creep in, too slow to even notice. You blink and she is closer, yet nobody ever said a word about it. No one tried to force a connection. They just let it happen naturally. The carpenter explained his craft to Eli while he worked. None of that fake patronizing energy adults often use. He spoke with genuine, quiet respect. He spoke like he would to a fellow craftsman, explaining how pine and maple handles sound entirely differently. He said softly, "Maple reflects." He let Eli tap the wood, patiently guiding him to hear the subtle differences. "Every material has its own voice," he explained, "just like every room has a warmth beyond actual heat." Little Norah wrote another message on her pad and quietly held it up. Eli leaned in to read her words, then looked up at Callum. "She wants to know if shapes change the sound." Callum looked at the girl. "Yes," he agreed softly, "that is exactly right. A curve redirects the path." He held a curved board steady, letting her tap it, a quiet, priceless gift. The little girl gave it a quiet, hesitant touch. She tapped again, a bit firmer, her brow furrowing in quiet concentration. While the child focused, Marlo quietly sat backstage, digging through old records. She finally unearthed the files on the Meridian Healing campus. She remembered the name, an old blueprint for a Boston children's sanctuary. a grand project funded by wealthy spotlight-seeking donors. Her corporate employer had once tried to buy their way into the project. They were turned away, told politely that no more money was needed. She forgot about it back then, barely noticing the architect's name, Reeves. She never imagined that prestigious title belonged to the humble carpenter working outside. Suddenly, everything made sense. She dropped the file and sat in silence. A buzzing phone broke her thoughts. It was the girl's big city specialist. She picked up, listening to the same cold, clinical advice as usual. He insisted on sterile rooms, strict routines, and expensive experts. He warned that warm, unscripted moments with ordinary folks were too risky. Goodwill, he argued, was no substitute for costly therapy. He feared that quiet, unmeasured kindness would disrupt his clinical maps. By medical standards, the doctor was right. He always was. He was a brilliant, highly paid specialist who genuinely cared, devoting himself quietly to the child's recovery. Yet Marlowe only stared outside. Below, the little girl sat with Callum, tracing patterns on a piece of wood. The carpenter gently guided her hand, whispering soft words. The child listened, entirely captivated. Marlowe kept her changing thoughts secret, softly agreeing with the doctor. She thanked him quietly for his concern and ended the call. Suddenly, an official warning flashed in her inbox, seeing her manager and corporate lawyers with aggressive, noisy urgency. Such lightning speed meant a powerful hand was pulling the strings. It demanded a strict review of their permits in this old, historic neighborhood, citing an obscure, forgotten rule she never knew applied to her land. These noisy legal hurdles were crafted with cold, corporate slickness to hide their true, selfish intentions. They weren't entirely wrong, but they left no space for a fair reply. "Let's look at this together," she knew the author instantly upon reading. She sent the threat to her big city lawyers, entering a loop of meetings. Her high-priced attorneys remained untroubled. They assured her these local games always happen when big money arrives, promising that with enough time, a quiet check would settle everything. She quietly told them she understood. Yet hanging up, she found no comfort in the smooth, expensive promises of those city professionals. Meanwhile, the ambitious Derek Holt was quietly digging for gossip with Bert. Now Bert meant no harm, but he loved the attention that came with sharing local secrets. The fragments he knew of Callum's past were enough to feed Holt's hunger for a public scandal. Soon Bert himself confessed everything to Marlowe. He called her, full of regret, admitting Derek had been poking around the workshop looking for dirt. He promised he only spoke of the carpenter's incredible quiet talent. That Callum was a true master of his craft who had slipped into town 4 years ago. "You and I know how loud rumors spread." Bert just hoped his loose tongue hadn't caused trouble. I assured him it was fine, though I had no idea what Hole was actually searching for. But I knew he would only find quiet, selfless care if he looked closely. This was a completely different problem. I really thought about warning Callum. You might wonder why I stayed silent. Honestly, so did I. I told myself I didn't have enough solid facts to actually help him yet. Deep down, I wasn't really convinced. At 9 o'clock that night, I was still sitting at my desk when a soft knock came. I called out, "Come in." Callum walked in with a thin folder, maybe 20 pages. Without speaking, he quietly laid it on my desk and stepped back. I opened it to find the entire building documentation meticulously rewritten with quiet care. Every single detail the inspector's warning had flagged as potentially non-compliant was fully resolved, citing the exact Vermont state laws and building codes in incredibly precise, thorough language. It demanded far more than simple construction skill. It required deep, expert knowledge of exactly how the law works and how to successfully challenge it. A simple Finnish carpenter, no matter how skilled, does not draft a masterpiece like this. I stared down at the paperwork, then I looked up at him. "I do not want this project stopped," he said softly, then simply walked away. I sat staring at the folder, realizing that the truest kindness never asks for any credit. The old house creaked around me, settling gently into the quiet night. Soft whispers of wood and beam adapting to the cool evening air. I sat thinking about his words, his quiet grace, and the vast, silent space that lay between them. Was he protecting this building, or some silent miracle hidden deep inside? And who warned him what Hole was really hunting? The next morning, I drove straight to the public library. Ruth Calloway had devotedly run the local public library for 22 straight years. You could see it in the natural, graceful way she lived in this space. She did not act like an employee, but she was not an owner either. She was someone who poured her heart into this quiet sanctuary until the place itself wrapped around her. She was 68, beautifully unhurried, with reading glasses resting on a chain. Her gentle nature made you feel like surprises were interesting, never alarming. I needed property records, but the old town planning files only existed on paper. They sat in a dusty archive room because the town never funded a digital transition. Ruth gladly went to find them, then guided me to a quiet table in the back. We talked softly as I worked. She asked how the building work was going. I told her it was fine. Ruth smiled, calling Callum the perfect choice. She knew nobody else could quietly heal a broken space with such gentle care. I agreed, noting that his quiet, hidden work had been absolutely exceptional. She whispered that he had always been that way. Then she stopped, and I looked up. You know that look. She stared at me like someone who had accidentally let a deep truth slip. Before, I asked gently. She breathed in slowly, placing her glasses on the table. She confessed, I already knew exactly who he was before he came to town. I read his story when he first arrived, but I chose to stay quiet. I knew his silence was to protect his family. I have respected that for 4 years. I remained silent. She softly told me his late wife was named Claire. She was taken by a reckless driver who ran a light on Commonwealth Avenue. It happened on March 14, 2020. You and I know real miracles aren't bought. That center opened on the 20th. It was his quiet life's work. 12 quiet years building a sanctuary for kids who spoke without using words. Silent children, kids just like she stopped. Children who needed his quiet care. Marlo stood still, unable to step inside. Ruth explained how losing Claire broke his spirit. The massive center opened without him. He handed all the praise to a junior architect, walked away, packed Eli up and drove north. He quietly bought back his old family home at its 1998 price, choosing to stay hidden. She paused again. The man wasn't hiding. He just couldn't go back to who he was. He needed a simpler, much quieter life. The archive room fell dead silent. Marlo whispered, Derek Holt came to you. Ruth nodded. Last week he asked what I actually knew about Callum. I told him he is an honest carpenter and a deeply devoted unsung father. She masked her anxiety well, but Marlo easily saw right through her brave face. Walking back, she rounded a corner. 20 feet ahead, Callum stood quietly by the busy schoolyard. Little Eli trotted through the heavy gate, his backpack hat weighing him down. Talking non-stop before he even made it to his father's side. Babbling about a map project, history class, and how his teacher got the dates wrong. His tiny hands waved with the frantic energy of a child holding in words all day. Callum knelt down to his level, completely unhurried, giving the boy his total, quiet focus. He wasn't waiting for his turn to talk, he truly listened. Marlo stopped cold. The feeling that washed over her in that moment had no name. It was not pity or simple warmth. She could not even face the feeling directly yet. It was much closer to that. Let's be honest, it is that shift when you realize you had it all wrong. You stare and suddenly the angle shifts, letting the quiet beauty reveal itself clearly. She watched in secret until the father and son walked away together. She headed back to the building alone. He quietly finished the room that Thursday morning. No rich benefactor paid for this. The official work order only mentioned the hallway. Just the 2 main front offices and that dusty storage room up north. A tiny forgotten room off the eastern hallway, barely 400 square feet. An old utility closet stretched into a strange shape over time. No one paid him to touch it. But when Marlo stepped inside that morning, the clean scent of fresh sawdust hit her instantly. A pure, rich aroma pulled her straight to that open doorway. Soft pale maple now completely lined the quiet walls. The smooth panels he crafted in secret fit perfectly between the beams, drawing your gaze without begging for attention. He dropped the ceiling exactly 8 inches lower than the rest of the building. It did not feel cramped, but rather cozy and deeply comforting. A single, narrow window was tucked high up on the southern wall. It cast light down at a gentle angle, slowly sweeping the quiet floor as morning passed. We both know true kindness works in silence. In the corner sat a simple wooden chair, built small for a child, with a soft cushion in a shade that barely seemed real. a soft, soothing gray that the peaceful room accepted instantly. Callum saw her watching from the threshold. He offered no explanation at all. He just whispered, "Elia's inside, go on in," so she did. Eli stood inside that hand-built room, slowly turning with open arms, quietly admiring the ceiling above. He whispered softly to little Norah. From the hallway, wealthy Marlowe only heard a gentle, soothing rhythm. Little Norah stood right in the center of the wooden floor, her face tilted toward the ceiling. As Eli finished speaking, the little girl took one brave, quiet step toward the chair, then froze. The humble carpenter, Callum, quietly slipped out the front door, stepping onto the wooden porch alone. He didn't look back for credit, no grand invitations, no desire for any praise. We know true miracles don't need a crowd. He simply stepped away, leaving Norah standing perfectly still. Finally, she walked over and sat down. The space worked exactly as the quiet builder had intended. Outside, the heavy wind rushed noisily through the maple trees lining the busy street. The distant rumble of traffic. A stray voice drifted through the narrow window, softened by his unpaid wooden panels into a gentle sound her delicate frame could handle without fear. Norah looked up at the beautifully crafted ceiling and exhaled. Her small hands, usually clenched tight against her sides, relaxed softly in her lap. Then her mouth opened. The sound that escaped was barely a whisper. Just a tiny hoarse breath that almost formed a word before fading softly away. It wasn't a real word, no one would recognize it as spoken language. But it was a sound, the first one she had made in 3 years, lasting barely 2 seconds. Eli stood completely still. He didn't dare make a sound. He didn't rush forward or grab her, refusing to make this hard-earned miracle about his own ego. He simply watched her with quiet respect, giving her a gentle, knowing nod of understanding. Marlowe, the wealthy mother, stood in the doorway, entirely unaware of how she had even drifted there. She watched her little girl resting in that hand-built sanctuary, made by a father who simply cared. Suddenly, her knees began to buckle. She pressed a trembling hand against the wooden frame, leaning heavily into the sturdy paneled wall. Marlowe let out a tiny gasp, but the quiet carpenter on the porch caught it instantly. He slipped quietly back into the hallway. Peeking inside, he saw Norah still, Eli watching quietly, and Marlowe resting dumbfounded against the hallway wall. Knowing a miracle had occurred, he kept his distance. "Let's look closer." When Marlowe emerged minutes later, she stood beside him in a deep, breathless silence. The street was perfectly calm, leaving the autumn maples to sway in their usual October dance, meaning they were loudly fighting the chilly wind to hold on to their leaves. "You knew," she whispered at last. "You knew what this room would do." It was pure gratitude, not a question. "I hoped," he replied simply. That quiet, honest word hung peacefully in the cool autumn air between them. Then reality struck. A cold, formal legal warning arrived that Friday, hand-delivered to his dusty job site. Holt's high-priced corporate lawyers had found a sneaky technical loophole. The quiet carpenter's building license was from Massachusetts. Vermont law required extra paperwork for out-of-state contractors to do any professional work. The document officially accused him of unlicensed practice. It demanded he immediately stop his generous work pending a state investigation. This meant involving the state regulatory authorities to shut him down. It was a cold, highly polished threat. Let's notice how wealth attacks. Holt paid heavily for this legal strike, eager to destroy a man who worked only from the heart. Callum quietly read the warning at his workbench. Instead of worrying, he folded it away, working out of pure love for another 40 minutes before sitting down. You and I know how noise spreads. Marlowe found out like everyone else. Hull leaked his statement to the Ashford Register. The local weekly paper splashed it across their website that very afternoon. The headline looked careful, but it was a quiet personal attack underneath. Local news loves to twist the knife. She tried calling Callum, no answer, so she drove straight to his place. He lived out of town, a quiet, humble home down a dirt road. It was the kind of home built slowly, piece by piece over many decades, shaped by quiet hands that cared about shelter, not perfect matching details. It was small, neat, and beautifully kept. Stacked firewood rested neatly against the south wall. Worn boots sat on the step. A kid's bike leaned against the fence, dropped in a rush by a happy child, left untouched ever since. Callum opened the door. Within seconds of stepping inside, those detailed drawings caught Marlowe's eye. They covered the entire wall of a room, serving as both dining area and study. Detailed pencil blueprints. Elevations pinned at wild angles, the beautiful messy chaos of a quiet craftsman pouring his heart and soul into every single line. It was meridian. She recognized that floor plan instantly from his old work. She saw his margin notes. The writing was precise, quiet, and deeply careful. It was the script of a humble man silently speaking to his work, pouring his entire soul into it. He had simply never taken them down. He explained the legal mess in a quiet, flat voice like a tired engine. Vermont's reciprocal licensing rules for applications. The actual chances of regulators stepping in, given the specific details of his job, and the quiet supervision work he actually did, rather than the original designs. He knew Hull could never win this fight, and calmly said as much. He just did not expect a loud public smear campaign. Marlowe asked him bluntly why he hid the licensing issue from the start. He replied, "Because it was my problem, not yours." She snapped back, "It is my building." A heavy silence fell between them. He let it hang there, and so did she. Let's ask ourselves, who stands up to a bully like Hull, and what does it cost a quiet, decent man to lose his reputation? He had built a peaceful, quiet life, but her lawyers were ruthless and incredibly fast. She gave a single order: stop everything. 10 years of town decisions, shady land deals, and zoning approvals. Track the contractors, find the money. They exposed the whole thing in 6 hours. A trail of consulting fees funneled directly into a Delaware real estate shell company. Hull's own son was the agent. 11 minutes was all it took to connect 6 developers who got easy zoning favors while Hull ran the show. The individual payouts were not that massive, but stacked together, absolutely massive. The corruption was so obvious that Marlowe's lawyer told her, "He will retract the letter before we even file." He was completely right. Monday morning came, and that letter simply vanished. They yanked the statement, hiding behind weak excuses about procedural reviews and checks. Suddenly, Derek Hull caught an illness his assistant claimed was an urgent family matter, forcing him out of town for a very long time. The building permit was quietly restored. The project continued, but as we know, the paper had already printed the noise. Then the story broke anyway. A local reporter dug past the noise to find the quiet truth. They uncovered Callum's past, exposing a quiet life that never sought attention. The headline was respectful, dragging his quiet deeds into the light. By Wednesday, the whole town knew their humble woodworker possessed a rare, quiet genius. He was actually a master at designing quiet spaces for healing hearts. Walking into the hardware store that morning, he immediately felt the unwanted attention. People stared and quickly looked down, or tried to praise his hidden work. It was all the same heavy attention, the exact kind of public praise this humble father had spent 4 years quietly avoiding. He returned to his sanctuary, standing in the quiet kitchen to escape the noise. Eli came home from school wrapped in silence, quietly sitting down to do his homework. The boy quietly ate, cleared his plate, and sat on the sofa right beside his father. "People at school are talking about you," the boy mumbled. "I know," Callum sighed. "I always knew your work had a deeper purpose," Eli said. "I never asked because I knew you preferred to keep your good deeds quiet." Callum looked at his son, wanting to explain, but some things are best left unspoken. He gently placed a hand on his son's head, a silent, loving reassurance that spoke louder than any words. The next morning, Callum found a small, neatly folded note waiting on his workbench. He had no idea how the quiet, disabled girl had slipped inside completely unnoticed. He slowly opened it. Inside was a delicate pencil drawing, a silent thank you from a child who noticed every detail. It captured the quiet corner, the humble seat, and a soft beam of morning light. Drawn inside were 2 simple figures, a tall man and a small girl, entirely anonymous. He stood by his workbench for a long time, holding that beautiful, quiet gesture. The quiet project finished in late October, just as the crisp autumn air swept in. Fall had arrived fully, painting the maple trees along the quiet road in brilliant colors. Mornings grew frosty, and the sky cleared into that brilliant deep blue of late autumn. The wealthy client slipped away, leaving the town spotlight behind to find her own quiet. The final permits were signed, and the quiet neighborhood returned to its peaceful routine. But you and I know that true, quiet kindness leaves a permanent mark on a man. His peaceful presence now held a deeper meaning. It was not the silence of a man hiding, but the steady, calm focus of a father choosing his path. The little girl's mother found him that afternoon, quietly inspecting his handiwork in the silence. She paused in the doorway. "I want to offer you a permanent position, not just contract work. Lead design architect for our special healing spaces program, along with several major new developments. You will have total creative control." He stood in silence, weighing what really mattered. Finally, he spoke softly. "The last time I designed a room for a child, I missed the opening. She was left waiting in the dark. If I do this work, I must be there for the people, not the praise." She understood his heart-valued connection over prestige. "Yes," she whispered. The grand opening arrived, though the silent buildup of genuine kindness had been growing for months. Little Norah found him before the crowds showed up. "Let's watch this closely." She slipped inside, finding him quietly preparing the space away from the public. She stood quietly right in front of him, waiting until he looked up. She looked at him with the pure, quiet gratitude of a child who needed no words to say thank you. Then she spoke two soft words, quiet but holding immense weight. "Thank you." Callum remained completely silent. He knelt down without rush, meeting her gaze with one gentle, silent nod. A quiet promise that truly matters, asking for absolutely nothing in return. She met his eyes for a quiet moment, then turned to walk away. When Marlo arrived later, she saw the shift. The girl walked lighter, not proud, just free, a quiet, unseen miracle. Marlo did not pry, letting her keep that secret joy. Their ride arrived at 11. Norah stood waiting, her jacket buttoned up and her notebook tucked safely away. The quiet carpenter stepped out onto his porch. 20 feet lay between them, a space where sincere emotions did not need to hide. "Let's watch this closely." Marlo handed over a simple card with her name and Boston office address. She offered it, and the carpenter stepped forward to accept it in complete silence. He turned the small paper over, holding it gently as their car slowly pulled away. He stood on the pavement, watching until the car turned the corner and vanished. His son Eli stood beside him. "Are you going to call them?" The single father looked down at the card, then at his boy. He looked toward the empty street, and for the first time in 4 years a genuine smile touched his face. Not a polite mask for an audience, but a deep, sincere moment of true joy. It arrived without warning, and surprisingly, it did not hurt. You and I know that feeling. The quiet beginning of something he could not even name. But this time he quietly resolved to stay and find out.